The moment that ship was stopped, something shifted. Not just in the water, but in the balance of power. One decision, one interception, and suddenly the world was asking a very uncomfortable question. How close are we to something much bigger? Now imagine this for a second. A massive commercial vessel moving through one of the most sensitive waterways on the planet. Everything seems routine. Calm waters, standard route, nothing unusual. And then out of nowhere, it gets flagged, surrounded and taken control of. No warning that the public could see, no dramatic countdown. Just action, fast, calculated, and very deliberate. And if you're someone who follows global tensions even a little, you already know this isn't just about a ship. But before we go deeper, if you enjoy content that breaks down global power moves in a way that actually makes sense, go ahead and hit like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow, and it keeps you ahead of stories most people don't fully understand until it's too late. So let's talk about what really happened here. Because on the surface, it sounds simple. Iran charges a ship linked to the United States. That's the headline. But headlines rarely tell the full story. The real story starts much earlier. For years, tensions between Iran and the United States have been like a pressure cooker, not always exploding, but never really cooling down either. Sanctions, military presence, proxy conflicts, economic pressure. It's been a long, complicated game of strategy. And ships, they've quietly become one of the most important pieces in that game. Because control over shipping routes isn't just about trade. It's about power. It's about influence. It's about sending a message without firing a missile. Now here's where things get interesting. This wasn't just any random ship being stopped. Every move in regions like this is calculated. Every action is watched. When Iran steps in and charges or seizes a vessel tied to the US, it's not just enforcement, it's signaling. A signal to the US, a signal to allies, and a signal to the rest of the world. And the message is usually layered. On one level, it can be framed as legal or regulatory. Maybe it's about violations, sanctions, or disputed waters. That's the official version, the version you hear in press statements. But underneath that, there's always something else, power projection. Because stopping a ship doesn't just interrupt a route, it creates uncertainty. It raises risk. Insurance costs go up, companies hesitate, routes shift, and suddenly a single action starts affecting global trade in ways most people never see directly. Think about it like this. If you were running a business and suddenly one of your delivery routes became unpredictable, you wouldn't wait for things to get worse. You'd reroute, you'd slow down, you'd rethink your entire strategy. Now multiply that by thousands of companies, billions of dollars, and entire economies depending on stability. That's the real impact. But here's the twist most people miss. Moments like this aren't just reactions. They're often timed, and timing is everything in geopolitics. Was this move connected to ongoing negotiations? Was it a response to pressure? Or was it a preemptive warning? Because when you look at history, these incidents rarely happen in isolation. There's always a buildup. There's always context. And sometimes, there's something coming next. Now imagine being in Washington when this news breaks. You don't just see a ship being stopped. You see implications. You see potential escalation. You see headlines forming before they even hit the media. Do you respond strongly and risk escalation? Or do you stay measured and risk looking weak? That's the dilemma, and it's not an easy one. Because every response sends its own message. If the US reacts aggressively, it could raise tensions even higher. If it holds back, it might encourage more actions like this, and that's where things become unpredictable. Because both sides understand this balance, and both sides are constantly testing it. Now let's zoom out for a second. Why does this region matter so much? Because it's not just about one country or one conflict, it's about global flow, energy, trade, strategic positioning. A huge portion of the world's oil passes through nearby waters, and any disruption, even a small one, can ripple across markets almost instantly. Prices react, investors react, governments react. And suddenly, something that happened in one part of the world starts affecting gas prices, stock markets, and economic decisions thousands of miles away. That's the chain reaction. And it's why incidents like this get so much attention behind the scenes. But here's where things get even more interesting. Not every move is meant to escalate. Sometimes it's about leverage. Think of it like a negotiation where neither side is speaking directly, but both are making moves on the table. Seizing or charging a ship can be a way of saying, we have options. And in high-stakes situations, showing you have options can be just as powerful as using them. Now, if you've been following the content on the physical silver desk, you already know that global tensions often tie back to something deeper: control, stability, and the future of economic power. And this situation fits right into that pattern, because every time trade routes are disrupted, confidence takes a hit. And when confidence drops, people start looking for alternatives, safer options, more stable stores of value. And that's where the bigger picture starts to form. But let's not jump ahead just yet, because there's another layer to this story that doesn't get talked about enough. The human side. Imagine being on that ship. You're part of a crew doing your job, routine operations, nothing unusual. And suddenly, everything changes. You're no longer just workers. You're part of an international incident. That kind of shift, it's instant, and it's real. These aren't just political moves, they affect real people in real time. Now, back to the bigger picture. When situations like this unfold, analysts start asking a different kind of question. Not what happened, but what happens next. Because that's where the real story is. Will this lead to negotiations? Will it trigger more actions? Or will it fade quietly while something bigger builds in the background? History shows us that sometimes the most important moments are the ones that don't explode immediately, but slowly reshape the landscape over time. And that brings us to another key point, perception. Because in global politics, perception can be just as important as reality. If one side is seen as gaining ground, even symbolically, it can shift how other countries act. Alliances can tighten, strategies can change, and new tensions can form. It's like a chessboard where every move is watched by dozens of players, not just two. Now here's something to think about. What if this wasn't just about the US at all? What if it was also about sending a message to other nations? Because in a connected world, actions don't stay isolated, they echo. And sometimes those echoes are louder than the original move. But there's still one question that keeps coming back. How far does this go? Because there's always a line, a point where pressure turns into something else, and both sides know where that line is, more or less. The challenge is staying just close enough to it without crossing it. That's the balancing act. And it's not always perfect. Sometimes things go further than expected. Sometimes reactions are stronger than planned. And that's when situations can escalate quickly. But as of now, what we're seeing is controlled tension, strategic moves, calculated risks, and a lot happening beneath the surface. Now let's bring it back to you, because even if this feels far away, it's not as distant as it seems. Global events like this shape the world you live in. They influence economies, they affect stability, and over time, they can change the direction of entire markets. That's why understanding these moments matters, not just as news, but as signals of where things might be heading. And speaking of signals, here's something most people overlook. When events like this start happening more frequently, it usually means one thing. The system is under stress, not breaking, but stretching. And when systems stretch, they either adapt or they snap. Now, we're not there yet, but moments like this, they're part of the buildup. They're pieces of a much larger puzzle. And the full picture, it's still forming. So here's what I want to ask you. Do you think this was just a one-time move or part of a bigger strategy? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read a lot of them, and it's always interesting to see how different perspectives come together on topics like this. And if you found this breakdown useful, share it with someone who follows global events but wants a clearer picture. Because most people only see the surface, and there's always more underneath. At the end of the day, this isn't just about a ship. It's about signals, it's about power, and it's about a world that's quietly shifting, one move at a time. And the real question is, are we paying attention before the next move happens? And just when it feels like things might settle down, they don't. Because after an incident like this, the real story actually begins. Not on the water, not in the headlines, but behind closed doors, in rooms most people will never see. Phones start ringing, emergency briefings get scheduled, advisors gather, and the question quietly moving through every conversation is simple. What now? Because no major power can afford to ignore a move like this. But here's where it gets complicated. Respond too fast, and you risk escalation. Wait too long, and you risk losing control of the narrative. And in global politics, controlling the narrative is everything. Now imagine this scenario. Officials are sitting around a table analyzing every detail. The route of the ship, the timing, the justification, the message behind it. Nothing is taken at face value. Every action is dissected like a puzzle, because sometimes what looks like a bold move is actually bait. And that raises a very uncomfortable possibility. What if this wasn't just about stopping a ship, but about provoking a response? Think about it. If one side reacts strongly, it can justify further actions. If it stays quiet, it can create an image of hesitation. Either way, there's a strategic advantage waiting to be taken. That's the kind of thinking that shapes these moments, and it's why things are rarely as simple as they seem. But here's where things take another turn. While governments are calculating their next moves, markets are already reacting, quietly, quickly, and sometimes aggressively. Shipping companies start reviewing routes. Insurance firms adjust their risk models. Traders watch every update like it's a signal, because in many ways it is. And when uncertainty increases, money starts moving differently. Safer assets begin to look more attractive. Volatile regions start to feel riskier, and suddenly a single event begins to ripple through financial systems worldwide. This is the part most people don't see, but it's where the impact really starts to grow. Now let's go even deeper, because there's something else happening at the same time, something less visible but just as important. Allies are watching, not just the United States, not just Iran, but everyone connected to this global network of power. They're asking questions like, how strong is the response? How far will this go? And most importantly, where do we stand if things escalate? Because in a world of alliances, every move forces others to think about their position. And sometimes staying neutral isn't as easy as it sounds. Now here's a thought that might surprise you. Not every country wants tensions to cool down immediately. For some, instability creates opportunity. Higher energy prices can benefit exporters. Shifting trade routes can open new doors. Even political pressure can be used to negotiate better deals. It's a complicated web, and every thread is connected. But let's come back to the moment itself, because there's still something unresolved. The ship? What happens to it now? Does it get released quietly after negotiations? Does it become part of a larger dispute? Or does it stay in limbo, a symbol of rising tension? Because sometimes, objects like this become more than just objects. They become leverage. And leverage is power. Now, if you've been paying close attention to the physical silver desk, you'll notice a pattern here. Moments of tension like this often appear small at first, but they tend to stack up over time. One incident becomes two become a pattern. And patterns, they're hard to ignore. But here's where things get even more intense. What if this is part of a larger shift that hasn't fully revealed itself yet? Because if you look at the last few years, global dynamics have been changing. New alliances forming, old ones being tested, economic strategies evolving. And in the middle of all that, events like this start to look less random and more like pieces of a bigger plan. Now, I want you to think about something. What if the goal isn't immediate conflict, but long-term pressure? A slow, steady buildup that reshapes the balance of power without triggering a full-scale confrontation. Because that kind of strategy, it's harder to detect and even harder to respond to. And it's exactly the kind of game that's being played in today's world. But here's the part that really makes people uneasy. There's no clear endpoint. Unlike traditional conflicts, where there's a beginning, middle, and end, this kind of tension just evolves, it shifts, it adapts, and it keeps everyone guessing. Now let's pause for a second and bring this into perspective. If you were an average person just going about your day, you might hear this news and move on. Another headline, another international issue. But beneath that headline, there's a chain reaction forming. Energy markets, global trade, political strategies, financial systems, all quietly adjusting, and most people won't notice until the effects reach them directly. That's how these things work. Slow at first, then suddenly very real. Now here comes another question. What happens if this doesn't de-escalate? Because while everyone hopes for stability, history tells us that repeated tension increases the risk of miscalculation. And miscalculations, they're dangerous. Not because they're planned, but because they're not. A wrong signal, a misunderstood move, an overreaction, and suddenly things move faster than anyone expected. That's the risk sitting beneath moments like this. But at the same time, there's also restraint. Because both sides understand what's at stake. They know the cost of going too far. And that awareness, it acts like a boundary, an invisible line that keeps things from tipping over, at least for now. But here's something worth thinking about. How many times can that line be tested before something changes? Because every test adds pressure, and pressure doesn't disappear, it builds. And now as we move forward, watch for patterns. Not just what happens next, but how often it happens. Because frequency tells a story, and that story can reveal where things are heading long before it becomes obvious. So again, I want to hear your perspective. Do you think this situation cools down quietly behind the scenes? Or do you think we're seeing the early stages of something much bigger? Drop your thoughts below. These discussions matter more than you think, especially when different viewpoints come together. And if this kind of deep breakdown helps you see the bigger picture, share it with someone who follows global news but wants to understand what's really going on beneath the surface. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about a single incident anymore. It's about a pattern forming, a tension building, and a world that's slowly, quietly moving into its next phase. The only question is, when that phase fully reveals itself, will it be too late to understand how we got there?